Greetings once again. This is the Zander channel, and I am Chosen Nolen. We're moving on with Critical Thinking, Chapter 13, How to Evaluate Your Own Thinking. This is not criticisms, but this is an evaluation. Remember, we're trying to keep the emotions out. It's a learning process, though. You're not going to be able to necessarily do it immediately. How to evaluate your own thinking. Reliable and sensible thinking can never be discounted. Whether you're a student, a professional, a housewife, or whatever field or industry you may be working in, whatever goals or aspirations you might have, whatever obstacles or difficulties you might be facing, you'll always be at an advantage if you know how to employ this critical thinking. Feeble thinking, on the other hand, will certainly lead you to difficulties, to pain and frustration, and a waste of time and effort. You may sometimes find yourself wondering, what's really happening in this particular situation? Am I being taken advantage of? Will I be betraying myself if I accept this idea as truth? What will the positive outcomes be if I take this particular action? If I decide to take this particular action, how can I get ready for it? How can I ensure that I will come out victorious in this particular endeavor? Am I really looking at the major issue, or should I be focusing my attention on a more pressing matter? Developing the habit of these questions and probing before acting or deciding can definitely send you towards the path of critical thinking. But you'll also need to train yourself so that you can be an effective evaluator of your own thinking. In order to become an effective evaluator of your own thinking, you need to prioritize improving your way of thinking. Now, a lot of people will stop here, if you haven't stopped already, to comprehend that this is a life-changing process. When you usually do something without thinking in your group of friends, now you're going to rationalize. Now you're going to use critical thinking in your decision-making, which is something different from what you were doing before, which means that you're considered a different person in a lot of people's mind. Unless you tell them that you're doing this ahead of time, which is a good idea, but do not let them talk you out of it. Critical thinking is here, and it's a tool for you to better yourself. Because they don't teach this stuff in school. They may teach it in some colleges for some degree paths, but most people say, well, I can think, right? These are tools that will change your life, and a lot of people will not like you because you have changed, which means that you're getting better, which means you're outside your comfort zone. You're outside of their comfort zone as well, as your friends, your best friends, your spouse, your children. All of these people will notice that you are changing. You're becoming more rational. You're becoming more of a critical thinker. You're starting to evaluate stuff better, right? Differently from what you were doing before. So this is not a bad thing, but it is change, and a lot of people are scared of change. Now, you can go through and listen to me and then move on and then not take anything to heart or to learn how to do this stuff, but I implore you to do this stuff. It has changed my life, and it will change yours. Make sure you pose these questions to yourself, because most people don't like these uncommon questions, or they don't take the time to think about these questions. They just act, and then a negative result happens, and then they're triggering that negative emotional loop. Have you discovered anything about the way that you think? Have you thought about the way that you think? Have you ever observed or studied how you think? Do you know anything about how your brain actually handles the data? Do you know anything about the differential or the different processes of your brain, including analysis, evaluation, and reconstruction? Do you know the ultimate source of your thoughts? What is the quality of your thoughts? Do you have more positive thoughts or negative thoughts? Do you have any ambiguous or fickle, erroneous, unreasonable thoughts? Can you fully control your thoughts? Can you fully control your emotions? Have you ever tested this control that you say that you have? Do you follow any deliberate criterion in determining whether you are thinking properly or defectively? Do you ever become aware of any major problem in how you think and then resolve it by your own intentional act of will? If someone ever approaches you and asks you to teach him or her about thinking, would you have anything to teach that person in a cohesive manner? It is essential that you understand that it is very rare to find people who think critically about thinking. This subject matter is not taught in most universities and colleges. Our culture does not actually support this way of thinking at all. Despite that fact, I'm sure that you are aware of the important role that thinking plays in our lives. All of the things that we do, desire, and feel are shaped about and around how we think. It is, therefore, quite surprising that humans are not at all that interested in thinking. You'll see it in today's society when you're just staring at the TikTok and then that, for like one or two things, and then all of a sudden 30 minutes later you're still on TikTok or Reels, Instagram Reels, or whatever is your particular addiction today. In order to achieve a considerable improvement in your critical thinking skills, you need to prepare yourself to do some intellectual work that many people consider repulsive or even tedious. But here's the thing. As soon as you start thinking intellectually by moving to a more advanced level of thinking, you will find out that it is not that hard to stay at the advanced level. You simply need to pay the initial price so that you can advance to that higher level. Don't think that you can become a critical thinker instantly, just as you cannot be a competent tennis player or a pianist overnight. To become a critical thinker, you need to have a desire and the willingness to undergo the training required for you to become successful. You should have the willingness to carry out training sessions that you may find awkward, demanding, and complicated at first, or maybe you can't think of anything to think about. Like successful athletes, you need to undergo a continuous practice and drills to train your mind to become skilled and competent. If you want your thinking to be improved, you need to prepare yourself to give what other experts in other fields of specialization give: dedication, hard work, continuous practice. Get yourself motivated, right? Get yourself some discipline. Here are some teachings you can use in this training or improving your thinking. These are a few of the techniques the critical thinkers use to improve their way of thinking, but that's not a complete list. One is always refine your thinking, right? And also, if you don't have anything to think about, as I mentioned earlier, if you can't think of anything to think about for critical thinking, look at the headlines in the news and do some research. Start thinking critically. Don't read through the entire thing. You could, but when you find yourself agreeing blindly to whatever the commentator or the opinion person is saying, maybe you need to reevaluate that. Do your own research. Do your own critical thinking. Now, this takes a lot of work to do this. I used to do this when I was in the military. This was part of my job. is to evaluate, well, where did they get their information from? Is that true? Or does that sound more like an opinion? Don't readily accept the ambiguous ideas that are thrown at you. Always be wary of unclear, hazy, unconstructed, and distorted thinking and speech. Always attempt to work out the practical implications of what other people are trying to tell you. What words are they using? Why did they use that word in that sentence? And what does that mean when it's used that particular way? Because that's what they're doing, right? It's a part of programming. TV programming, watch this program. It's called a program for a reason, and you're accepting that. It is a program, which means you're accepting that it's programming you through their opinions, by showing you pictures, by showing you things that happened, possibly, or things that are on a green screen. Many things can be put on green screen now. You know that. Start by looking at the surface, but do not forget to dive underneath. When you hear a vital news story, try to make out what the real meaning behind it is. Describe how you understand the issue to another person so that you can refine how you think about that particular issue. Make it a habit to summarize in your own words what other people are telling you. That shows everyone that you understand and comprehend what they are actually saying, and you have it down, right? You got it. You know what they're saying and possibly even what they're feeling. Then share your own version of this issue with the other person. Ask them if they understand it correctly. Do not ever consent to or dispute an idea until you are certain that you fully understand the idea. We frequently believe that our thoughts are understandable to us even when they're actually not. It's being lazy. You need to be aware that unclear, confusing, jumbled, misleading, or unreliable thought process can pose major problems in your life. If you want to become a critical thinker, you need to learn how to think with clarity, to pin things down, to spell things out, to look up the definitions of the words, and plainly express what you mean to say. If you don't know what a word means, or you think you know what it means, but you really don't, and you're using these words, I think of The Princess Bride. This word, I don't think it means what you think it means. You're using words to try to get a communication across. You're not going to get it across because you're using the wrong words. And even over generations, between a parent and a child, then when the child learns the new definition of a word, the parent knows the old definition and they cannot communicate properly because they're using the words not wrongly, but their definitions have changed between the generations, and now you cannot communicate with the generation. It's a generation gap is what they call it as a whole. If you cannot do it properly, you may have to gather more information so you can fully understand the idea of what that individual is saying. But it's mostly about the idea of the definition of the word. Which definition are you using compared to which definition the other individual is using? There's several definitions for each particular word, right? If you look in any dictionary, it has several citations for the definition of the word. Which one are they using in this particular context? And that's why English and some of the other languages are very difficult to comprehend. So always stick to the point. Be wary of fragmented or patchy thoughts, the kind of thinking that jumps around with rational connections. Be observant and notice when you or the person you're talking to has become distracted and unfocused on the real issue, the topic being discussed. During discussions, stay focused on looking for all possible ways to resolve a problem or the issue. If you're a critical thinker, stay centered on primary objective or the topic at hand. You'll be able to make points that are useful, applicable, and related. You'll become attentive to everything that is connected to the main topic. You'll be able to reject everything that is unimportant, unsuitable, and superfluous and unrelated to that particular topic. You will know that something is relevant if it can directly help resolve the issue at hand. So when you or another person start to drift away from the main topic, you will know how to bring the conversation back to what really, truly matters, right? Because we'll go back to the negative thought loops or the positive thought loops, right? So when you have a negative thought loop and you're discussing a matter of import, and in the individual, it triggers an emotional response. And then that emotion, because let's say it's the emotion of anger, when it triggers anger, it's going to create more thoughts of other things that make that individual angry, and you're going to get off topic. That's how a lot of times people get off topic, is because it triggers an emotion and they run down the rabbit hole and they get away from the actual matter at hand. So you need to be able to identify when that happens and bring that back as soon as possible, right? Because otherwise they're going to run off on down one rabbit hole and through another rabbit hole, because that rabbit hole they've talked about firstly is going to trigger another anger emotion that's going to run them down a separate rabbit hole. And now you're way off in freaking left field or on a different planet, and you're trying to get back to the topic, and you just lost the conversation. 3, bravely question all questions being asked. What does that mean? Be wary of questions being asked during a discussion. Be mindful of these particular questions you ask and the questions you fail to raise. As mentioned earlier, you can start looking at the surface, but an exploration that is limited to the surface is shallow. You need to take time to investigate the deeper implications of the questions. Pay attention to how other people pose their questions, their timing in posing the questions, and their failure to ask relevant or important questions. Critical thinkers know how to constantly pose questions with the intention of understanding and effectively dealing with the different ideas being presented to them. Critical thinkers examine the status quo. Critical thinkers understand that things are frequently not what they seem. The questions that critical thinkers ask break through impressions, facades, and half-truths. Critical thinkers ask questions that enable the true problems to come out so that they can think their way through said problems and find a solution or the solutions, right? It's curious on how they don't teach any of this stuff as critical thinkers in any school system within the United States. I wonder why the education boards do not want you to think critically, do not want you to be able to pick apart their speeches, do not want to be able to think for yourself. 4 is be rational, right? We had a whole chapter on it before in chapter 10. Similarly, pay attention when other people are being unreasonable. Learn how to recognize when other people are merely using rhetoric to make themselves look rational, but their behavior indicates otherwise. This is what happens a lot of times when we're talking about riots, right? And protests. A lot of people are there just to be there. They don't know why they're there. They're just there. Okay. Oh, we had, 5,000 people show up for this protest. Okay. How many of them knew why they were there protesting? So we need to try to decipher why you or other people are becoming irrational. Do you have a vested interest that keeps you from being rational? Do others have such a vested interest? And what is their vested interests? So, evaluate your thinking at all times, right? I mean, it's going to take a while to do that in the beginning, but when you find yourself in some sort of discussion or even an argument, you are the one that must take responsibility to think critically about what the other person has said, bring them back to the original issue at hand so that they stop running down rabbit holes. Because if it develops into an argument, there is really no resolution except that which you will have to present, because we're going back to a negative thought loop. And people bring up stuff from 6 years ago or yesterday or 2 weeks ago that is maybe a little bit related, but it does not help the current situation. And if that is the case, that they're bringing this stuff up, what is the core issue that they seem to have an issue with? Right? That's how you get to the root cause of the problem. And especially in marriage relationships, when somebody continues to do something over the course of years, how can we find what the actual core problem is, and how do we change that way of thinking or acting? Okay, a lot of times it's an addiction, a lot of times it's a miscommunication. So how do we fix that between a relationship? It is mostly through critical thinking. You have to identify the key issue at hand firstly, then move through that. Now, you can say that you have to go to a psychiatrist, psychologist to have some sort of relationship assistance, but I would say that critical thinking will play a role no matter what you do. If you are in counseling, continue the counseling. I'm not a medical doctor. Just keep doing that thing, but also, you know, the medical doctor will say that you have some sort of breakthrough, okay? Using this critical thinking, you will have breakthroughs if you are in some sort of therapy, and that's fine. I'm not dissing on the therapists at all in this book, but I'm not advocating for you to not take your medication, to not see your doctors, but I am telling you that this stuff will help you, because the only one that really cares about helping you is you, right? The doctors came into their practice because they truly want to help people, but they can only do it after a certain fashion. They have to follow their rules. Critical thinking is outside of their rules, right? Because it's not taught in universities in the United States. I just mentioned that. If it is, it's an elective type of thing. It's not required for anything, right? So, again, I'll stop the ranting. We'll move on to chapter 14, which is the 4 tiers of thinking.